this refuge, its value is to get people understanding what the interaction between them and their environment. If you don't understand, you can't protect. Mm-hmm. You can't take steps to make it better.
The work that created the John Heinz Refuge Center happened over the course of over 3 decades. It began in 1950 with members of the Delaware Valley Ornithological Club that had concerns about what was going on with the lands where the refuge now sits. They formed an organization called the Tinicum Committee, which was later known as the Philadelphia Conservationists. This group was led by Alston Jenkins. The first accomplishment their group was successful in completing was the donation of 150 acres of wetland by Gulf Oil to the city of Philadelphia to be managed as a wildlife preserve, as well as 70 more acres donated from the Corps of Engineers shortly after. All of their efforts as a group were successful, except the passage of the bill that would have stopped the construction of the Interstate 95. Delaware County politicians were in favor of this construction, and because only 1/3 of the refuge sits in Philadelphia and 2/3 sit in Delaware County, the efforts that created the refuge resulted from cooperation between both counties' officials. When the highway was constructed, massive amounts of dredging and filling decimated over half of what remained of Tinicum Marsh. At this point in time, around 1971, Delaware County officials were not listening to the conservationists group, so a grassroots organization called CARP formed to support the preservation of the marsh. The part of the refuge that was in Delaware County needed to be preserved because the Philadelphia portion was not, and still is not, large enough today to support the wildlife that resides on these wetlands. Preservation and cleanup of the Delaware County marshes were critical for the success of this space. CARP, short for Concerned Area Residents for Preservation of Tinicum Marsh, and the Philadelphia Conservationists proceeded to work together, pushing for the preservation of what was then known as the Tinicum Marsh in the 1970s.
CARP did our part for the passage of the first legislation for the refuge, which was 72. That was the establishment. But the refuge legislation passed with no funds attached. And it took out some of the lands that had been under consideration for inclusion in the boundaries.
Again, there was not one Delaware County official at this time in favor of refuge creation before grassroots efforts stepped in. There were plans to fill the wetlands and build an industrial park, but CARP's efforts pushed back hard and facilitated the passage of legislation to protect the refuge lands in 1972. The refuge was formally called Tinicum National Environmental Center, and it was the nation's first urban wildlife refuge. CARP's efforts dwindled down and became part of the Friends Group of the refuge over time. This Friends Group is still in existence today. On June 30th, 1972, Public Law 92-326, creating the Tinicum National Environmental Center, now known as the Heinz Refuge Center, was signed and implemented by President Nixon. However, this passed with no funds for the refuge, and wetland acreage was cut from the proposed legislation prior to it being passed. In 1972, highway dredging and filling were still going on, the Fulcroft landfill was polluting the wetlands, Darby Creek sewage plant was contaminating the waters, and the incinerator was causing air pollution. There were so many problems that the refuge faced, and CARP was ready to address all of them. CARP's first strategy was to find ways to transform public apathy into public support. CARP used an argument displaying the economic value of Tinicum Marsh to the public if it remained undeveloped in order to rightfully gain the public support they needed for the additional pieces of legislation.
The developer was using economics, and we decided economics is the way to go. People want to know what's in it for them if they choose something. And by and large, nobody, not even us, really knew the value, the monetary value of a wetland.
Since the first legislation passed in 1972 did not meet the expectations of the Philadelphia conservationists, Karp spearheaded the next 5 additional pieces of Tinicum marsh legislation over the course of 10 years, which eventually authorized purchase money for refuge lands and restored lands to the refuge boundaries. The final piece of Tinicum marsh legislation granted the marsh $19.1 million in perpetuity, meaning that the funds provided to the wildlife refuge had no expiry date. Another one of Karp's main initiatives stopped the development of the industrial park, which would have negatively impacted the quality of life for residents in all 9 communities within the Delaware County, as well as Eastwick. Moving forward to today, even though the refuge is relatively small in size, the lands have a great impact in the Philadelphia region. There are 1,200 acres with over 10 miles of hiking trails and 4.5 miles of tidal marshes. The wildlife and ecosystems still manage to flourish despite being surrounded by industrialization, superhighways, an airport, and residential development. The lands of the John Heinz National Wildlife Refuge at Tinicum lie downstream of the Darby Creek watershed.
Here you are in a canoe in the summer with the plants towering over you as you're going down the stream. You don't hear anything. You don't hear the airport. You don't hear the traffic. You do hear the rustling of the wind in the reeds. You do hear the bird calls as they go one another. It's fantastic. If you're sitting there, you cannot imagine that you're in the middle of this huge metropolitan area.
About a third of the refuge lands lie within the boundaries of the city of Philadelphia, known as the impoundment, and 2/3 lie within the Delaware County. This is a unique place for refuge lands, but the urban environment makes the refuge even more special and beneficial to the communities surrounding it. The region south of Philadelphia where the wetlands are located is a floodplain. The wetlands at the Heinz Refuge slow down and help prevent flooding as the spongy soils absorb the waters. During times of drought, the water is slowly released. Each marsh acre can absorb up to 640,000 gallons of water. If the refuge were to be developed on or near, this will increase and perpetuate the flooding that already exists in the area.
So flooding is getting worse. Not only is it a combination of having development upstream that allows all that water to drain down to the bottom of the watershed, but also because we are seeing more and more precipitation taking place. As a result of climate change, we're finding that storms are getting a lot worse. They're becoming more frequent. And in an area that already is receiving all of this excess water coming from development in the form of stormwater, but then all this additional precipitation is taking place.
Preserving these lands is Philadelphia's best option in mitigating these issues.
I really don't remember flooding like that in Eastwick before the development. I think it's a graphic display of cause and effect.
Redevelopment issues have been an ongoing problem for the refuge since the early 1950s. When the interstate was being built, dredging and filling harmed marshlands. The expansion of the international airport caused pollution on the refuge, and urban development encroached on the refuge area.
I believe that the EFNC, working with the city for planning the use of that 135 acres, is strongly considering that it's a real part, because most of that land is floodplain. You fill in the floodplain, where's it going to go? It's going to back up somewhere, and it's also going to adversely affect the refuge because the dynamics of the water flow underground as well as on the surface are affected by development.
Redevelopment is an inevitable advancement in an urban environment, but the preservation of the marsh and surrounding areas should be strongly considered.
Here you are in a watershed that has all this water draining down from all this other development. You put any more development down there, the area floods already. If you had homes there, they would have flooded out at some point in time. So it has multiple benefits, and that's why it's so critical to make sure that no more development occurs in that area, and definitely no major projects that would pass through the Heinz Refuge.
Water contamination has been another one of the biggest obstacles for the Heinz Refuge over the years. When the refuge was first being established, CARP worked to close 2 landfills that were contaminating the wetlands. They aided in banning construction in the area to reduce overflows of raw sewage into Darby Creek, worked to stop the county incinerator from depositing residue into the waters, and stopped the plan to fill and build on the refuge wetlands. When the first stages of development in the Eastwick area were under consideration, the developer was untruthful as to what was actually being deposited in the landfills. Because of this, the wetlands were being contaminated by industrial and hospital waste, which was killing off natural habitats and ecosystems.
It's unfortunate that there were 2 Superfund sites located right in that vicinity. One is the Clearview landfill, the other is the Fulcroft landfill. The Fulcroft landfill obviously being the next town over, but a lot of that drainage passes through the refuge, which obviously is adjacent to next to the Eastwick community.
Water contamination issues harm both wildlife and the water supply of the Philadelphia region. It is vital to keep these waters clean because it provides water to surrounding communities. The Heinz Refuge has been affected by many negative environmental issues and contaminants. Today, the regulations surrounding the area are more strictly enforced, and the efforts of keeping the area healthy is important for both the natural space and the community. Since the refuge has been in existence, the water has gotten much cleaner. Grassroots groups and coalitions have protected what is left of the open spaces, and the eco-health of the area has greatly improved. This is evident as we look at the reintroduction of many of the native species re-inhabiting the wetlands over the past 40 to 50 years. The wetlands are beneficial to the surrounding communities because the marsh plants are capable of removing up to 5.3 tons of chemicals per acre per day, as well as produce up to 6.2 tons of oxygen per acre per day. This is extremely beneficial for both water and air quality in the area, and if the refuge were not healthy, the community would not be able to benefit from these processes. The marsh is also classified as an aquifer. The rock formation that lies under the wetlands supplies well water to a large portion of Gloucester County, New Jersey. If the land is left open, it can continue to seep into these wells, but if it were to be filled or contaminated, then those waters will not be usable. This is a service that is provided to the community that has no cost to the public. The wetlands play a huge role in erosion control by slowing down and absorbing floodwaters in the area. During storms, water crashes downstream and tears soil from stream banks, eroding lands and properties. When these waters reach the marsh, they are slowed, eliminating the erosional effects of land in the area.
It prevents erosion. That's private and personal and something they like.
The refuge area has the natural capability of deadening the noises surrounding the community. It provides barriers of noise coming from the airport and the interstate highway located next to the Eastwick community.
But, we were surprised ourselves. We didn't actually have a clue what the economic value of wetlands were to the local communities. And how could you not?
This refuge enriches the local communities with all of the natural benefits that it provides. Along with being a space for wildlife to inhabit and the community to explore, it provides economic benefits from the processes the wetlands produce. The value of keeping the refuge healthy is beneficial to the surrounding community. The refuge currently has an urban refuge initiative that is designed to reconnect and engage urban residents with the natural world. This initiative is one of the main goals that the refuge has had in mind since the origin of the wetlands preservation.
Connecting people to nature was one initiative that they had first, and that's what we work with, the Friends Group.
The goals are to both provide education and outdoor activities for community members to improve the relationship between nature and people. We cannot forget the original goals of the refuge. The preservation of the space was won with bipartisan support that was generated by educating the public on the issues surrounding the area.
Their additional goals are really working closely with the community, the surrounding communities, and educating youth about what they can do in their backyard. So trying to take the refuge into the community as opposed to always just bringing people to the refuge system, which of course they do as well, but finding that it can't just be doing work only within the refuge boundaries, but to gauge people and get them also interested as well.
This vision of education still remains true today, and it is important to pass this on and involve the current local community with the nature and goals of the refuge.
One of the chief reasons that it was formed was for educational purposes, to try to connect the urban populations back to the roots, what makes life worth living is embodied in a refuge. The lessons are there.
Education is one of the core initiatives of the refuge. It is used by students of all ages, from preschoolers to university students. One of the features of the refuge is the pollinator garden, which is utilized as a teaching tool for kids to learn about planting and natural processes of flowering and development. The refuge is used by the community for its trails, hiking, biking, canoeing, fishing, and other recreational activities that bring people together in this space.
And they saw a really strong connection for those people that enjoyed being outdoors, doing those type of activities and re-engaging the next generation to participate in those activities.
One major event that takes place at the refuge in order to attract the community is the annual Groundhog Festival. The event is free to the community. There are hikes, crafts, art contests, and live music. This day brings people together to enjoy nature and of course discover where Tinicum Tim, Heinz's own groundhog mascot, will predict more spring or winter. Another program that the Friends of Heinz Refuge supports is the Heinz Refuge Award. This began in 2010, and it brings people together to learn about the environmental role of the refuge in the Philadelphia area. The award is given to a school-age student to incentivize the learning and relevance of nature in their lives.
When I was a kid, I played in the refuge, what's now the refuge. We fished, we hiked, we picnicked, we did everything there. And my dad was a seasonal construction worker. In the wintertime, he often didn't have work. And he was a hunter, so he would go out to the refuge and hunt. And we would have rabbit and pheasant to eat. And he knew roots, so he would dig the roots that were edible and bring them home. And so the refuge, the lands that are the refuge, fed us. So that was kind of in here, my heart.
The Heinz Center's convenient location in Eastwick allows the refuge to provide community outreach, which has a major impact on the surrounding areas. Through educational and recreational opportunities, the Heinz Wildlife Refuge fosters a deep connection to the natural environment felt by visitors of the refuge and residents of Eastwick. At its establishment in 1972, its purpose was to promote environmental education and provide wildlife-oriented recreation opportunities for visitors. The Friends of Heinz Wildlife Refuge, an organization currently working within the refuge, is dedicated to promoting public understanding of and support for the environment. The Heinz Wildlife Refuge is used daily by many Eastwick residents for a variety of purposes, including exercise, volunteering, and enjoying one's natural surroundings. Those who frequent the Heinz Center have cultivated deep personal connections with the natural environment and have had many opportunities to engage with the environment and environmental issues related to the refuge. Since its establishment, it has served as a resource to help people connect with and appreciate their natural surroundings.
Because it doesn't match your outfit.
What brought you to the Heinz Center today?
It was a beautiful day and we woke up and wanting to go for a walk, so we're lucky enough to live close by and we decided to come out for a stroll.
Mm-hmm.
I volunteer here and I love this place and I live around the corner, so this is right in my backyard.
we're just kind of, we're going to go to Chinatown, and we just decided to stop off here.
Eastwick and the surrounding community are facing many environmental issues, and following through with the original goal of promoting environmental education, the Heinz Wildlife Refuge has successfully filled gaps in both local and global environmental knowledge of its visitors. Through the Cusano Environmental Education Center and other environmental education efforts, the refuge has proven to be an effective resource not only for spreading this information throughout the community and to its visitors, but also as a place to facilitate discussions surrounding these issues. The Environmental Education Center works hand in hand with organizations such as the Eastwick Friends and Neighbors Coalition, which holds their meetings at the center, to spread this information and educate nearby communities on environmental hazards.
How do you all connect with the environment?
Yeah?
We like to see all the wildlife.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
And it's nice and peaceful just hearing all of the nature sounds.
And do you think that being at the Heinz Center helps you connect?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is our happy place.
I've always connected with the environment. I grew up in the woods. I spend most of my time outdoors.
Well, I love walking here, as you can see. I need to shed some pounds, so it's a win-win for me. I get to be in tune with the environment because it's tranquil. I get to shed a few pounds. I get to connect with other people while I'm here, and I get to actually work inside.
I just want to know what animals are here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we like looking at the different migratory patterns and that kind of stuff. And, just
And
learning how we're
fishing.
affecting them.
I try to get out into I try to get out as much as possible if the weather's nice. Other than that, I just basically try to get out as much as I can.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hiking, biking, but always trying to, always being ethical and responsible, right? Isn't that the best thing?
We just liked it because it was there, not because we knew then what value it had other than just pleasure. So as time went on and we began to see the highway people doing the dredging and filling, it made me sick. But I didn't understand that there was anything you could do about it.
Well, we are sitting in the middle of two Superfund sites, one being Clearview. I always get that confused. And the other one is the Fallcroft landfill. It's important to tell people about that because it's been here for so long. And of course, we are directly affected by the toxins that have been here, probably longer than I've been on the face of the earth.
I can only imagine the different issues with pollution and, overcrowding and all these kind of things that are always, up against the
disturbance
ecosystem.
in the ecosystem.
Current environmental problems with Eastwick would be the landfill issue and the use of the property that is adjacent to the wildlife refuge.
Yes. Let's see. Flooding, more flooding on top of more flooding. And it kind of sucks to breathe in Eastwick because of all the environmental pollutants that's here. So it's a lot of stuff. It's a whole list.
The internet
that may say something about them.
So you come to the Heinz Center to get that?
The Friends newsletter, the newspaper, people who work here. I guess what else I would like to learn about environmental hazards in this area is are there others?
So by going to public meetings and also connecting with other people who are into like environmental injustices that have occurred here in Eastwick. I love this place. I love living in Eastwick. This is a win-win for me. I've been here for 13 years, and if I can say anything at all, this is a hidden gem right here, and so are its people. So I invite everyone to come and enjoy this great place.
The Refuge, its message is that it's important for life. It's the food chain. We're at the top. If one of the levels of the food chain get affected adversely down below, it affects everything on up, which is us.